All right, I hope you can all hear me well. And I first want to say that this is probably a bit of a different talk than I usually give. And it took me a moment to think about what I actually want to talk to you about. And the organisers had a lot of areas to cover, and in 7 minutes I think we're not going to manage everything. First thing first, this is how I got to end up in academia. Everyone's path is different, and there's no patent recipe of how you're going to be a PI eventually, or wherever you're going to end up. And I'm going to actually start this talk with a bit of geography, because for me, ending up in academia had a lot to do with moving countries and moving labs. So this is where I started. I trained as a BSc and an MSc at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, ETH, in Zurich. I'm Swiss originally, as you may hear once in a while in between. I studied biology as an undergrad, and at ETH you have 2 years of hardcore lectures, but the third year of your bachelor is what I would call shopping year. Whereas you have lectures Mondays and Tuesdays, you're actually spending the rest of the week in research labs doing research projects, which allows you to shop around in different areas, in different labs. And that's where I met this guy, or this monster. This is Vaccinia virus, and I was working on a project, on a very, very minor project actually, in the lab of Ari Helenius. And I literally got infected with the virus bug. I found it quite interesting how clever a cell biologist that Vaccinia actually is, how this virus knows more about the cell that we will ever learn. And I got interested in studying the virus. That's why I started working as a voluntary intern in Ari's lab for most of my holidays where we didn't have exams. And I developed new recombinant virus tools, familiarized myself with virology and cell biology. And even though I originally was planning to do my MSc in biological chemistry, and I still did an awful lot of organic chemistry and synthesis in my master's as well, but I ended up finishing in biochemistry because I thought that was more suited to what I needed, because I wanted to continue in virology. It was not unfruitful to work in Ari's lab. I got 2 publications out of it, and I was like, right, let's move on and let's go somewhere else so I can learn something new. And that's when I made the move to the Netherlands. I went to Utrecht University and the veterinary faculty there to do a PhD on coronaviruses. So I moved from a DNA virus to a single-strand RNA virus. I moved to the dark side, something a bit more mutagenic, even though coronaviruses still have proofreading function. But the other driver for me to go to Peter Rottier's lab was also that the position I was offered was within an EU ITN network, an initial training network. It means you have different labs all around Europe, and you have trainings in all those different labs. I learned about EM structural analysis in Stockholm. I learned about biophysics in Berlin, and about computational analysis from people of Israel. So actually it expands your horizon, and importantly, it builds a massive network, because every one of those people knows more people, and that is how you actually get to know other people that you could collaborate with, that you could do a postdoc with, and so on and so forth. And that's when, after my PhD, I decided to move countries, and surprisingly this had absolutely nothing to do with connections or anything. It mostly had to do with my now husband. He had a permanent job. I just had finished a PhD. He was in Scotland. I was still in Holland. So I had to choose where to move to, and I decided I don't want to move to Glasgow, even though Glasgow has a fantastic virology program, but I was really not fond of the weather. So I looked around what I would like to do in the UK, and I found a group at the Roslin with which I would like to work with. And they had funding for me. It was the group of Tait Burkard working on flu, but only for a year. And suddenly this position came up working on arterioviruses, PERS, and doing genome editing. And it really felt a bit like this job advert had been written for me. It had all the different requirements that I had with virology, working on coronas, which are very closely related to arterioviruses. And I had good training on cell biology, which was required to work with macrophages. And I knew the genome editing was something I could learn. And that is how I came to the Roslin Institute. I applied for the position, I got the position, and I started to work with pigs and pig viruses. You'd think it's quite a stretch from working with viruses. It's actually probably more coming home for me, because turns out my parents have an SPF nucleus breeding herd in Switzerland. So they're pig breeders. So this was a very close link, and actually with a lot of support from the Institute, I ended up moving into a career track fellow position last year, which is an assistant professor position. And I was lucky enough to already obtain quite a bit of grant funding for genome editing, diagnostic tool development, but I also have a PhD student who works more on host pathogen interaction studies on a cell biological level. So it's been very successful. But what has influenced my decisions to move labs, to move countries? First thing, it was driven by learn something new. Don't get stuck just because it's convenient. It's very easy in academia, if you know somebody else in your institute that has a position, just to move. It really helps you to expand your network as well. And also, new countries always teach you something new. It might be a new language, but it also is a different way to work. I definitely noticed that when I was moving to the Netherlands, because I find they have a much different attitude to work-life balance and to work efficiently, not 24/7. So you learn how to actually structure your day better. You have maybe less of a lunch break, but you manage to get 3 or 4 experiments through in a day instead of just 2. And that means maybe you can also stay away from the lab on Saturday for a time. And then, of course, as I already told you, private decisions came into account here. My husband made me move here, and actually it was a very lucky move. We got married 2 years ago, whilst I was still a postdoc, and we're still married, so we've not gotten there. Right, I need to speed up. So what helped my career? First thing is definitely determination. Be determined what you want and tell your bosses that you want it. It helps if you put yourself out there, lead research gatherings, anything. But of course, you also have to work for it. And at the end of the day, it's also just luck that plays into it. And for me, definitely the pigs were quite lucky. So it's also obviously networks and supportive labs and mentors or supervisors are always a good thing. And I hope in the future, for future scientists, this is not a long stretch of male supervisors. I definitely also had good female role models in this. What would I advise to young scientists? Find the career path that is right for you. Academia is not the only way you can go. You can go into industry, into patent law, into laboratory design, into virtual lab environments, design computational things, government. The world is your oyster, and really choose what you want. Especially when you move up in academia, it's not only about research anymore. It's also about finding funding, managing a lab, managing your finances. So it becomes a very different job very, very quickly. Choose projects that interest you. Again, don't just move for convenience. You spend an awful lot of your time on the projects you work on. If you don't like them, you're not going to succeed. You're going to make yourself miserable. Move countries or at least labs. Every lab will teach you something new. And as I said, don't be afraid to go for positions that are above your pay grade and ask for things. I went for a position above my pay grade after my first postdoc and I got it. And it's worth it. But also find a decent work-life balance. There's too many PhD students and postdocs with mental disorders these days. Make sure that you take time out. It helps you be creative as well. If you're constantly at work, you cannot think about anything else. So take a bit of time once in a while. It makes you more creative. And that's it. Thank you. Questions?
The 10-year track position, of course, a lot depended on that. Was that an open vacancy? Did you suddenly have the opportunity, or was it because you were already in the lab that you immediately got into that? Or was it a competitive?
It was a competitive
advertisement?
Yes, it was a competitive advertisement. It went through a few cycles of different things. I had also applied for fellowships at the same time, and I actually had to pull out of one of the competitions because I already had been offered a position here. But it was competitive. It definitely also helped already being here, just because people know you. That always helps, but that also helps if you build your network otherwise.
And are there requirements after 5 years, or I don't know how long in Belgium it's 5 years,
yeah.
You have to produce, after 3 years already, a report, after 5 years a report, because there are some requirements to have achieved.
Yes.
And if you didn't achieve in Belgium, you're not allowed anymore to stay at the university, at that university. You cannot apply anymore for any position.
I presume here you could go back to like a postdoc position, but the way it is here, you have to write a report every year. Requirements are, for instance, acquiring competitive grant funding, publishing, those are the major ones.
And say how many? Do you have a list of what you have to accomplish?
They are a bit vague on that one, but basically it's pretty much at least 2 publications a year as a corresponding author. But I presume there's always room because some people, for instance, in bioinformatics, maybe are more collaborators. But we have a 4+1 system eventually. So after 4 years, you get an evaluation. Outcome 1 is you're promoted to a group leader position. Option 2 is you get a year to improve yourself. And option 3 is, thank you, it was great, but you have a year to look for another job, basically.
Being a young scientist, do you think that all the internet tools now you have will has changed the way to network and to move around and like all the LinkedIn, all those new tools we didn't have as young scientists? Do you think it's something you really use to keep your network and be active and move and change countries and lab?
Yes, I mean, especially for international, it makes international collaboration so much easier. I've got projects with scientists in the Philippines. Without Skype, that would be a very slow process and a lot of traveling. It takes 24 hours to go there and 24 hours to come back just in travel time, and you're usually not there for very long if it's just for collaborative travel. So it makes a world of difference. I'm also involved in an Erasmus Mundus Masters. That is my teaching duty at the moment. And we have 3 location masters, 2 in Barcelona and here in Edinburgh. And if we'd constantly have to travel for communications, that would be impossible. So I think it makes the world more interesting for both students as well as scientists.
So you always stay in academia, you never go in other field like private sector stuff. During all your career, do you think about leaving academia, or you always want to stay in this?
It's an interesting question. I think I might have to answer this in 4 or 5 years' time. At the moment, I find it very exciting. I actually like the movement into different areas, into different positions, managing a group, doing the people management aspect, but also defining your own areas of research. And I was in the fortunate position that I already could do that quite a bit during my PhD and my postdoc. My supervisors always allowed me to explore my own research interests beyond the project I was assigned. And again, if you don't ask for that, you'll not be told to do something else but your project.